Hey guys, hope you're doing well today. We're changing the gears a little bit, sorry, shifting gears a little bit here today to talk about a question I get pretty often, which is, what should I be focusing on for my retirement, right? And again, like I hate that question about retirement because ultimately, you know, do I think you should ever retire? No, right? My grandfather is now 96 and he's been retired for like 36 years, almost as long as I've been alive. And I think it would have been better off just, keeping on working a little bit here and there. Maybe not full time, perhaps, but regardless. Um, so a question I get very often is how long will it take for me to retire? And most people aren't very financially savvy, so they don't understand what's required for you to retire. There's something called the rule of 25, and there are three levers you control that I'm going to talk about as well right now. So the big question is, most people get fixated on a certain number, right? Like as an example, I went for a walk with one of my buddies who's a CEO of a company in Toronto, and he was telling me just in passing that his objective by the age of 55 is to hit a net worth of liquid $50 million. So we're talking about that over lunch afterward, and I'm like, but why do you need $50 million? Because like he wants to just go off and get a sailboat and sail around the Caribbean for a bit, and then go to the Mediterranean and sail around, Europe and stuff like that. And I'm like, how much do you spend per year? Would you say roughly? Sorry, someone joined and their mic isn't off right now. You guys can just mute yourselves. That'd be awesome, please. And thank you. There we go, mute. Um, so he said about 200K a year, roughly 200K a year. So I said, okay, well, 50 million dollars is way more than you actually need. He's like, yeah. He's like, you're right. Like we thought about it for a bit. We discussed this over like the course of like 2, 3 hours. We went for like a long hike and then lunch. And he said, you know what? Maybe I don't need that much money. Maybe I can retire sooner. And maybe I can retire at like 47 or 46, right? And I said, yeah. Why don't you enjoy life? Because ultimately, we don't know how much time we have, right? So the first thing is figuring out like what's your actual objective, right? And a good way to figure this out is to take your annual expenses. Again, like take a spreadsheet out, take a piece of paper out, or like a notepad. Write down what you spend each month, like your fixed expenses, your mortgage payment, perhaps, whatever. But again, figure that if in 20 years or so your mortgage is gone, that expense will be gone as well, right? But let's just say, for example, you have your mortgage payment, whatever, your rent, your electricity, your phone bill, etc. All these expenses that you have that will be there presumably, for the next 30 or 40 years, right? Granted, thinking back like 30 years, a lot of people didn't have internet bills, for example, but they had different bills. So that's the first question you got to ask yourself is what's your expenses per year, and take that number and multiply it by 25. That will give you your retirement objective. Now, there's also something you got to factor in as well, which is um, what kind of expenses, sorry, what kind of cash flows will you have in the future that will reduce your overall expenditures. So, for example, if you have a pension or some kind of social security, for example, like those things, you got to tie them to the number as well. Beyond that, the explanation here is that essentially by having this number of expenses times 25, it gives you an amount that you can withdraw safely without touching the principal, essentially, which allows you to kind of combat inflation and keep your number flush, such that you can keep on withdrawing over the next 25 to 30 years, perhaps. Keep in mind too that the average man lives to be about like 82 years old, roughly depending on where you are, 81-ish. In the US, I think it's like 76. That's the average like lifespan for a male. For a woman, it's like 81-ish. So if you're like 50 years old and you're planning to live to be like 90 or 100, the probabilities aren't really in your favor in that respect, right? So you got to think about this realistically overall. But again, take your expenses times 25. That gives you your overall target, right? A safe target to look at. So in this case, let's say you're spending 60 grand a year times 25 gives you a target of $1.5 million, right? That gives you a safe 4% withdrawal rate where you can survive for the next 25 or so years on this money, right? Again, very important because this number is your financial freedom number, essentially. The whole thing about like Freedom 55, whatever. That's kind of what you want to think about. Again, I don't think I'll ever retire myself. I love working. I love using my brain. I love talking to people. Sitting around doing nothing is just, it doesn't appeal to me at all whatsoever, right? But some people just want to relax and sit on the beach and sip margaritas, and that's teach their own, right? Um, so I already mentioned this, right? Why this works. If you withdraw 4% per year, that will outlast essentially 3 decades roughly of inflation adjusted erosion to your portfolio by withdrawing overall. And again, this might vary over time depending on when like when you're retiring. That's why if you're retiring and for example, like during 2008, 2009, I remember one of my profs in university. He told me that he had a couple of clients that withdrew their portfolio at the very bottom of the market, like March 5th or 6th or whatever that it was, like the very bottom of the market. And he implored them to not do that, right? They withdrew at the very bottom and they missed out on all those massive gains to the upside afterward. So again, timing is kind of important on when you retire. If you retire during like, a bear market, kind of unfortunate because obviously you're withdrawing from your portfolio and your number might not be at the maximum value, for example, right? But this is why it's important to plan over time, plan longer term, not so short term overall. Again, timing might be difficult and it might be unfortunate if you're retiring during a bear market, but that's just part of the life, right? You can't really plan. What's the saying? We make plans and God laughs or something like that. Anyways, so here's an example of a gap, right? So someone's spending 60K a year. Again, consider any pension, social security benefits, or other financial windfalls that may come to you later in life. So, like, let's say, for example, you have like, I don't know, like an inheritance coming your way, or some kind of vesting of T-bills, perhaps, like something like that. You got to factor this in your equation overall, right? But you can make a spreadsheet and just start putting down numbers, and over time work those numbers, right? See what you need to retire on. So in this case, you have, for example, 300K in savings. You're saving maybe 15K annually on a 60K take home, which is pretty tough, right? You're pretty much bringing home like, or saving $1 in $4. Again, maybe not very realistic overall. But your target here is $1.5 million, right? And so that should be your overall goal, $1.5 million. As you approach that target, you shouldn't be taking more risk, to try and like hit it faster. A big problem I see a lot of people making is they achieve a certain level of wealth. Like I've had clients that are worth like 5, $10 million, and they're trying to take crazy risks to make even more money. And I'm like, why do you need to take more risk? You're making so much money already, and you have a great portfolio already. Like, don't try and swing for the fences. Just try and keep on growing your portfolio steadily, because ultimately, will your life really change if you have 20 million versus like 10 million? Not so much. My old boss is worth like $150 million, and he just stays at home pretty much all the time. Doesn't really do much at all. Like, I mean, his life is pretty cheap. I don't think it would matter if he had 5 million versus what he has right now. But regardless, so there are three levers you can pull to improve your financial standing when it comes to retirement. The first one is spending less, right? A great tip in life: live below your means, right? Decrease your consumption and lower the number you need overall, right? So a lot of people, they make the mistake of falling into this. It's called a hedonic treadmill, where we're pretty much, as your earning potential increases overall and you earn more money, what you do is you spend more money. So, I remember when I first started working, I was making like 40K a year roughly. And one of my coworkers got a boost from 40K to like 48K. And the first thing he did, traded in his used Toyota Corolla, got a used Mercedes C300 or C230, whatever like the lowest model of a Mercedes was. And so he's like celebrating about it, and he's like all happy about it. And I'm asking him like, so how much did it cost you, whatever? And he's like, well, I traded my car in, and it's only costing me an extra $600 a month, including my car being traded in for the next like 5 years. And I was like, okay, so you're spending $7,200 a year additional on this used car, um, and you're making 8 grand before tax. I'm like, the guy's name's Ruben. If you're watching this, Ruben, which I doubt you will, but I'm like, Ruben, you just lost money because your 8K increase in pay is before taxes. You're spending $7,200 a year after taxes. You're losing money, right? So a key lesson here is just live within your means. As you make more money, do not change your lifestyle whatsoever, right? Like obviously, maybe eat better food, perhaps. Like focus on your health, do your blood work, that kind of stuff. Like maybe like do that more often, but don't go and buy more fancy clothing and a newer car and stuff like that. Wait until your nest egg is big enough, because ultimately, if you just keep on spending as you earn more money, you never get ahead at all. You're just chasing your tail pretty much over and over again. And like to a point here, um, one of my friends, he asked me, he's like, this is like I think about 3 or 4 years ago when Palantir was about $10 per share. He's like, what should I invest in right now? I've like 80K to invest. And I said Palantir. Like I was so gung ho about Palantir because I thought they were going to take off, and they did. They went from like a low of $6 to $200 a share. At the time, it was like $10 per share, and he was considering either investing money in the market or buying a new car. What does he do? He goes and buys a used Aston Martin, and basically the capital he would have spent on buying Palantir at the time, at the peak when Palantir was $200 per share, would have been worth like $1.6 million roughly. Instead, he had a car that he used for a couple of years, and he traded it in now for a Porsche. So like you could have basically bought that car, or bought a new car, outright, and still had like $1.3 million left over, $1.4 million left over if you were smart with your money instead. So again, like deferred gratification is very, very important. This is where discipline comes into play, right? Like you got to think about yourself and be like, am I lacking in discipline? Most people are. Most people just go and buy on a whim things they don't actually need. So spending less, that's your biggest lever, right? For most people, the lowest hanging fruit is just spend less money. Don't buy shit that you don't need, right? That's it. Real talk. Anyways, lever number two is earn more, right? Raise your income through your career growth or side earnings, perhaps. So again, another anecdote. One of my friends, he was working at a bank for about 12 years in Toronto, and he's making about 105K roughly. He had a defined benefits pension plan, which is obviously very, very important. But he was pretty much capped on what he was earning. And so a job opened up with someone that I knew, and I said, "Hey, man, this job is open. Would you be interested in applying to it? Because my other friend is hiring for this job." And he's like, "Yeah, but my pension, you know." I said, "Well," he's like in his early 30s. I said, "Are you really going to stay here for the next, 25 years or 20 years or so? Like, realistically?" He's like, "I don't know." So I'm like, whatever. I mean, just go for an interview and see what happens. Anyways, long story short, he gets the job. They boost him from 105K at the previous bank. He's making like 160K right now. So 55K additional, right, in his pocket. Um, what did he do? He went and bought a new car right away, obviously, which is, back to my first point. And he bought a new watch as well. But but the point being is that that was a massive way for him to increase his earning potential, right? To leap from one company to the next. And oftentimes people get very complacent in life. They say, I'm very comfortable with my employer. I know them very well. I'm going to stay here and stay put and not ever really explore what competitors are paying, perhaps, right? Remember, for competitor, they want to get like the knowledge you have of of your current company, perhaps, plus all your experience and any training you've had already, and they'll pay for that essentially, right? They're paying you a premium to take you away from that company, right? They want to poach you essentially. So thinking about it from that perspective is very important, and loyalty in the corporate sector, I think, is pretty. If you're a loyal employee, sorry to say, but you're kind of stupid, to be honest, because ultimately corporations don't really care about you. To them, you're just a number essentially, right? As we've seen in the last few years, massive layoffs at big companies. I know people that have been laid off that were at the corporations for like 25 years and they got laid off, right? So ultimately, you got to do what's best for you. The last lever is investing wisely, right? Compounding the savings from spending less plus the additional earnings by investing wisely and not gambling your money and throwing it away, right? So pretty much lever number three, compounds levers numbers one and two. Um, so I already mentioned this, like how to decrease consumption, obviously, cutting your expenses, right? So remember that every dollar that you trim off your annual spending, that cuts your overall target by $25 overall. So each year, you're able to like shave off 5K. Let's say, for example, you go from having, this guy Ruben. Let's say you go from having that used Mercedes to staying with your Corolla, right? And you're saving that extra whatever 5 6K a year. you just drop your retirement number by $125,000, right? Um, and obviously, as I mentioned, you're freeing up more capital by not spending it on things you don't actually need, right? So again, it's important to inventory your life and look at what you're spending on. Ask yourself the question: do I actually need this? Right? Does it actually improve my standard of living that much? Like for me, my biggest expenditures, I'll be honest, really good food. I buy a good whiskey because I enjoy good whiskey, books, and anything around my health. Gym membership, running shoes, blood work, that kind of stuff. All about your health, right? So anything that improves your overall well-being in that respect, very important. Obviously, travel too, right? Like I love traveling as well, but again, do so responsibly. Don't go into debt to do this because again, if you go into debt, you end up in this kind of wormhole, which just sucks you down because essentially you have no way of getting out of it, right? You want to achieve escape velocity by building your nest egg up high enough that you can say no to things you don't want to do essentially over time, right? Very important. The next thing is increase earnings. I already mentioned, growing your career, promotions, certifications, developing new skills over time. Now, again, when I say this, I'm kind of apprehensive about saying it because ultimately with AI, a lot of people that have done certifications or new skills for like during COVID, a lot of people did programming certifications like that, and because of AI, you can now use you can pretty much vibe code anything you want. So certain things aren't as valuable anymore, right? Unfortunately. But I think it's important to network, understand how to speak very well, be very numerate, be very literate, know how to write very well overall. These are all skills, and more importantly, how to think critically as well, right? Use your brain logically, use your brain to its capacity, essentially, right? Most people don't do that. So, very important. And again, hopping between jobs, negotiating for raises as well, asking your employer, right? Ask your employer, say, hey, I want a raise, right? You don't ask, you don't get. Um, there was, um, yeah, I won't go into another tangent. We're already 20 minutes in right now, but uh, anyways, the last thing is side income, right? So consulting, freelancing, starting a side business, perhaps. I think everyone should have or aspire to have multiple revenue streams in life because if one gets cut off, you have numerous ones still operating for you, right? So again, with that in mind, depending on what you do for work, might be a bit difficult. But like I know, for example, I have friends that work in the trades. They do side jobs on weekends, right? So like that. So that's an example that I can kind of stick to or speak to rather. Depending on whatever you do, might be different. Last thing is investing wisely. So your rate of return will compound the other two levers of saving plus earning more money as well, right? And you got to be very disciplined in this approach. Now, for most people, again, like we're talking here to an audience of people that have perhaps more financial knowledge than the average person does. But for most people, you should be in broad market exposure, low fee ETFs like VTI, VOO, that kind of stuff, right? Um, just park your cash and just dollar cost average and sit in those positions over time. And over the next 25 years, let the markets do their magic over a long time horizon, right? Don't really care about dips. View dips as opportunities, right? Like I was talking about. Again, simple, requires very little oversight overall. And given the lack of financial literacy among the average person, this is the best option. Now, if you're more educated and you understand how to manage your own portfolio, and you are managing your own portfolio, define risk on every position you take, right? Um, Target favorable risk reward setups. So don't just just take trades, or investments off the cuff. Do your research, understand why you're taking a position, and then structure it effectively, journal it, and then later on review what happened as it transpires, right? And I think it's important also to take some risk where you have enormous upside, but keep that risk very, very small. Because again, these small seeds of risk where you plant, 1%, for example, of capital into a position might turn into 10, 20, 30, 40% return over time. Um, there was one position that when I was in university, my one of my profs talked about. It was this copper company. They were 1 cent at the start of our semester, and he's like, you guys should buy $100 worth of this, whatever. Again, he gives us financial advice, and so a few people actually bought it, and by the end of the semester, it was like $2.50 per share, right? So crazy return overall on $100 if you risk that. Like it's pretty interesting. Again, I'm not advocating taking stupid risks. I'm saying do your research, and when you see opportunity, take some small risk. Right? No risk, no reward. The biggest risk in life is taking no risk at all. Next thing is putting it all together, right? So you can see over here on these graphics, let's say your baseline target is 25 years. Well, if you spend less, you earn more, you invest wisely, you might cut your overall time to spend, I mean, to retirement dramatically, depending on your situation overall, right? If you do each one individually, you cut it a little bit, but if you do all three of these things, you cut it pretty dramatically overall. And again, maybe you don't want to retire, perhaps, but ultimately, everyone wants financial freedom. You want the freedom to pretty much spend your time as you please, see your family, see your friends, be healthy, get proper sleep, work out, etc. Most people don't want to spend their whole lives just toiling away to help make someone else rich, perhaps, right? And the next steps: figure out your own number, right? So write down your expenses for each year times 25. That's your target. Next step: identify your weakest lever, right? For most people, it'll probably be your spending lever, right? How much money are you spending and wasting, perhaps, right? That's probably going to be your weakest lever. But again, identify if you can perhaps earn more money at a competitor, right? Job hop, or if you should invest more money. There was a guy that I knew that was married to a girl that I went to school with, and she left him because he refused to invest his money. Like he was making like 100K as an engineer in Toronto, but he refused to invest a cent of his money. He's like worried about the markets all the time because of 08, 09. And so he just kept all his cash sitting there. And I was telling him, I said, "You're losing money to inflation every single year. So you should be investing it." But anyways, I don't know why they split up, but that may have been one of the reasons why. But again, spending, earning, or investing, where is the most obvious opportunity for you? Identify that lever for yourself, right? Could you be spending less? Could you be earning more? Should you be investing more, perhaps, right? Or being more aggressive? If you're young, take more risk, be a little bit more aggressive, be more equity oriented, right? As you get older, into your 60s or 70s, you should not be taking risk at all. Essentially, like take nominal risk for fixed income rewards, essentially. And the last thing is building a plan for the lever, right? So don't be vague about it. Build an actual plan. Say what you're going to do with it, and be intentional with this approach. That's pretty much it for today, guys. I'm going to open up to Q&A, but I'm going to stop recording here because I don't want to make this video too long. So I'll stop recording. And then if you have any questions at all, by the way, anyone watching this, send me a note on Discord or reach me on my website, upfinity.com as well. And let me stop recording here.